Okay, so before we start looking at a few of the details, let's look at just some around the world. So this is from 2018. I'll provide a link to this. I'll put the Excel sheet for all the data related to this into Canvas, and you can take a look at it. And then it's also going to be involved in a slight review project I'm going to have you do. So first, looking at life expectancy. So life expectancy, the country with the lowest life expectancy, 52.8. Central African Republic, and the highest one, Hong Kong. So first of all, before I go to the lowest, some of you are probably wondering, why is Hong Kong listed as a country? Well, you see the SAR, that's a special as autonomous region, I believe is what the A stands for. Hong Kong reports their data separately. So in international data, they are always counted as a separate, they're always listed as if they're a separate country. It's not a separate country, but the data is reported separately from mainland China. And that's why it shows up like this. Incidentally, second place is Japan, and it's a very close second. I think it's like 1/10 difference. Okay, so that's very high. Central Africa, 52.8. So this is the lowest in the world. Incidentally, if we're looking at this data 10 years ago, the lowest in the world would have been in the 30s. Okay, so this is a tremendous improvement over this time period. And one of the big reasons why it's recovered so much is the drugs for treating HIV and AIDS. Okay, so in countries that had high rates of HIV/AIDS, then the life expectancy is just plummeted because you had lots of people dying in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. Which is unusual in any country. And so the antiretroviral drugs that came out have really made a big difference in this. And so this 52.8 is actually quite high compared to many of the other countries that would have been lower than this in the previous years. Okay, expected years of schooling. So this is given trends for current children. What's the expected years of schooling? So low is South Sudan, 5. And high is Australia of 22.1. The Australia number, I looked at it. I actually tried to look up some more information about this because this seems incredibly high. Because this would be equivalent to basically a master's degree, will be the average. But I have heard that there is a lot of demand. Education is really kind of taking off in Australia, and a lot of people are spending longer and longer time in school. Incidentally, the goal, which we're kind of aiming at later on, we're going to look at this goal when we actually calculate the index. The goal is really, I'm calling it a goal maybe in parentheses, is 18 years. Okay, so what that means is a lot of people go to college and quite a few people don't, and the average person at least gets some kind of specialized training after high school. Okay, so about 18 years is kind of considered, let's say, good enough. And 22 is actually probably a little bit too high, because this means people are probably spending longer in school than they actually really need to, given the jobs that they're doing. Okay, so we're going to see the goal later on is kind of like 18. Mean years of schooling. So this is really based on the past schooling that happened. So the mean years of schooling in Burkina Faso, which you had heard about before in last week's unit, 1.6, really extremely low. And again, this is because in the past, very few people were going to school, and of older people, almost nobody was going to school. Okay, compared to Germany of 14.1. Again, you might be surprised that this number is fairly low, but it's also averaged, and there's going to be older people who did not finish school. And again, this is for adults 25 and over. Okay, some of these are sort of converted based on different education systems in different countries. So Germany was the highest at this time. Incidentally, U.S. is pretty close to Germany, although U.S. is nowhere near close to Australia in the expected years of schooling. Finally, GNI per capita, the lowest of 777, Central African Republic, and the highest of Qatar, or Qatar, I think is the correct way to say it. I'm not totally sure. Of 110,489. Incidentally, for this one, we can call it the goal is 75,000. And meaning after 75,000 GDP per capita or GNP per capita, we don't see many changes at all in standard of living or anything else. There's some studies have shown for families, for example, after you get to this level, there's not really much change at all. So this is kind of a goal. So we're actually not going to But this shows how big of a range there is, an amazing range that we see in the world. Incidentally, in case you're curious, the U.S. life expectancy is only 78.9. So U.S. life expectancy is quite low. And when you look at if you look at the data later on, if you look at it's quite low given the income level of the U.S. The U.S. income level is in the almost 60,000, and it's one of the highest income countries, top few in the world. But the life expectancy is pretty low, 78.9. In fact, it's been kind of stagnant around there. It actually even went backwards a little bit, which is very unusual. Which that ties us for 37th place with Lebanon, and it's just ahead of Cuba, one spot ahead of Cuba, and several spots behind Costa Rica and Chile. All countries which have much lower income per capita than the U.S. does. So what's going on with the U.S.? Well, that's kind of another story altogether. But basically, what's going on in the U.S. is the U.S. has high rates of diabetes, heart disease, and other things. But there's also one of the other things going. So there's a lot of kind of what people sometimes call lifestyle diseases, maybe a little bit more than other countries. There's probably some. U.S. has a higher infant mortality rate than other countries, and this seems to be related to inequality and the healthcare system. And then there's also much more people dying in the middle, both from in some compared to some countries in terms of dying from violent deaths, but especially dying from things like drug overdoses. The rates in the U.S. are astronomically higher than almost any other country in terms of the drug overdoses, for example. So anyways, that's just sort of an extra aside.